Welcome to Winning on Issues, where Texas politics meets strategy and implementation. I'm your host, James Dickey, former chairman of the Republican Party of Texas. This week, we welcome Dr. Dawn Buckingham, Texas's first female land commissioner, lifelong public servant, and a ninth-generation Texan with a record of pioneering achievement in medicine, business, and government. From protecting the Alamo to modernizing disaster relief, retaining energy independence, and enhancing veteran services, Commissioner Buckingham's role at the GLO touches nearly every Texan. Welcome, Dawn.
Hey, it is great to be on with you. We're super excited to be able to be here and talk about all the fun things the General Land Office does.
Thank you so much. But I want to go back a little bit first. Your family are some of the earliest Texas settlers, and I got a chance to see some of that with the amazing maps and land grant histories that the GLO has. How did your roots and your upbringing on a Texas ranch shape your sense of public service and resilience?
Well, I am Texan to my core. We were literally 9 generations ago, some of the first settlers. Ironically, one of the first cases the General Land Office settled was against my family because my ancestor was there when the Austin colony showed up, and they decided to honor Austin's Mexican grant and not our Spanish grant. So kind of funny that I'm in this position now. I tease that we're going to revisit that case from 1836, but we might. No, I'm kidding, of course. But, you know, from there to being the British consulate to the Republic of Texas, I come from a very long line of rowdy Texans who just love our state.
So you have that amazing family experience, but you've also had an incredible personal background, from volunteer firefighter to surgeon to now land commissioner. Talk about how your personal experiences led you here.
Well, I tell you what, if I think God giggles at us when we make a plan and we think we know what we're doing with our lives, because it doesn't always turn out that way. He always has other plans for us. But ironically, when I was 9, actually, I sat down and I planned out my life. I was a very serious child. And I was like, okay, I have 3 tracks. And my first track was being a firefighter. My second track was being an orthopedic surgeon like my dad. But I already hated what government and insurance companies were doing to healthcare. So I was going to have my own island, build my own hospital, and fly my jet helicopter to the mainland when I needed groceries. You know, this is my 9-year-old brain. And last I was like, maybe I want to be president. So I'm sitting down at dinner and you know, very serious dinner. And I'm like, okay, family, and I'm 9 again. And I'm like, I have charted 3 paths and I'm considering my options. And I get to the president thing and my dad laughed so hard he might have spit out his drink. And he was like, you will never be a politician. You're way, way too outspoken. You have an anti-authority tilt that just cannot be stopped. And you're just not meant for politics, Dawn. No way, no how. So in high school, I just always have been called to service in the service of others. And when they're in crisis is when people need you most. Happens to be when they're the least lovable, but it happens to be when they need you most. So being able to do that was amazing. Just the volunteer fire department out there. And then, I always wanted to be a doctor. But then when I graduated high school, my family had a major financial setback, so I didn't have money for college. So I was faced with that reality of I'm just going to have to work 2 jobs and live at home and put myself through college, which I did. Graduated magna cum laude out of UT, and then went to UTMB. In the middle of all that, met my husband. We've been married about to be 34 years in a couple days here, almost our anniversary. And then just, went to medical school, but then through medical school, I really, just that reinforcement of, again, how government and insurance companies mess up healthcare. I became an advocate on patient-centered healthcare, which is when you go see your doctor and they tell you you need an x-ray, you should be able to get that x-ray. And we all know that's not exactly how that happens in today's world. And so through that frustration, I sought leadership positions in every state, national, local, and international medical organization, became an advocate speaking all the time in Washington, D.C. and Austin. And then I got to know people. And then Governor Perry appointed me to the State Board of Educator certification, and Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst put me on the Sunset Commission. And then you and I met, of course, forever ago, way before either of us were political animals, or you were pretty close because you were the county chair, or almost county chair at that point. But then, I ran on the Lake Travis School Board. And you remember I put you on some committees because all of a sudden I was like, ooh, we have a problem in our public schools. Who knew at that point? It was kind of before we knew that being on the school board was cool, and we were really having those issues bubbling up. And then, of course, ran for the Senate, and then, of course, ran for this. And I love this job, but it's just one thing folds into the other. But what I really care about every day is I love Texas, every square inch of it. I think we are the shining star that leads our country. I think our country leads the world. And so we need strong, outspoken leaders who are doing, who are going, setting that visionary path. And I think we'll continue to lead the world if we do so.
Well, and I did very much appreciate the way you looped me in, and I loved seeing behind the scenes how dedicated you were to conservative principles and making sure that the right thing absolutely got done. And I can't wait to hear more about how the right things are getting done now at the land office with you. And let's start with a highlight. What is, of the things that you've accomplished so far, and we'll get into more details on a lot of them, what's the one thing that really stands out to you that you're most proud of, and why?
Well, I have a couple, but I will tell you, being Texas's first woman land commissioner is kind of fun. I will tell you, one of my favorite things I got to do was make Texas bigger for the first time in a couple hundred years, declaring islands in the Rio Grande, Texas, to give law enforcement access to them and kick the cartels out of their safe havens. That's been fun. I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. We also moved the Oklahoma-Texas line, so that was kind of fun. And you know, just every day we make an impact. But I do think the most important thing that I'm doing, the thing that really has that lasting change, is the Alamo. Getting the Alamo right, being sure that that building is standing for the next 500 years, teaching our kids our loud and proud history so that they can pick up the torch and fight like our forefathers did. It's important, and it's probably the single most important thing I do, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more. And as a percentage of the budget and a percentage of the people in the land office dedicated to it, it's not a big thing, but there is nothing more important to the culture of Texas and the history of Texas than that responsibility. Let's talk a little bit about that and how you manage to preserve and restore without accidentally letting more damage happen.
Well, okay, I'm going to tell you this on your podcast, but I joke it took a woman to have the balls to do it, because we've known that the Alamo had structural integrity issues for a very long time, for decades. And yet the plan to try to figure out how to restore it is complicated. And and Alamo is a huge project, $550 million, landmark funding from the legislature. Dan Patrick has obviously been leading that charge. So many people working so hard. So it's not just me, and I don't ever want to give that perception, but we have a great plan. So let's just talk about what the visit was to the Alamo and what it's becoming through this, because what we're really doing is making a visit to the Alamo worthy of the significance of the events for the first time since the battle, because we're loud and proud Texans and everything's big in Texas. You know, size matters. I'm going to be honest. And yet when we brought our friends and they stood on that corner and there was the busy street and all the high-rise buildings around the Alamo and the lovely wax museum to your right. And honestly, all of our friends were like, is that it? I had actually someone ask me, why did they move it downtown? You know, just all of these things. And so what we're doing now, we've closed that busy street. That's a pedestrian walkway. We have acquired where the wax museum was. That's a 160,000 square foot museum. Definitely battle centric. That is why people come to the site. But it also helps to understand the battle, to put it in the context of time. We're talking about early Native Americans all the way through to how the Alamo continues to affect pop culture today, because we want to continue to have an effect on pop culture, because we think the story of the Alamo is great. We're building a children's education center that should finish in the next few months. First time ever, we're having dedicated curriculum for our K through 12 kids, early childhood included, and just teaching them about our loud and proud history in a way that they learn best. And we have a place for them to eat their lunches, and we have a place for the school buses to park, and we've just made it such a better experience for our kids. Of course, the collection center has been open a couple years now, the Phil Collins collection, 20,000 square feet, full of thousands of artifacts that are just amazing, that is so fun. Last week, we unveiled the cenotaph restoration. It is gleaming, glittering, shining with the spirit of our defenders. Of course, that's the considered headstone for all of our defenders who gave the ultimate sacrifice that day. And just, it's amazing. Then we get to the building. So this is where it gets complicated. 300-year-old building. It didn't have a roof at the time of the battle. It actually didn't have a roof for 30 years after the battle. The famous parapet, the iconic, what we're used to seeing, was put on 30 years after the battle. So many different things. In the meantime, the roof that's on it has structural integrity issues, is causing active damage. We've got limestone walls that are wicking salt water up out of the ground. If you've seen limestone around a saltwater pool, it doesn't end well. That's why no one does it. And so we had real issues. And the first real hurdle we had to get over was, in the United States, there's this idea of preserve and place, which basically means fall to ruin. And there was a subset of people who felt like we just needed to let it fall to ruin. We couldn't touch the roof. We couldn't touch the walls. We couldn't. So we fought that fight. And we're doing great. We've got our permits from the Texas Historical Commission. But what has to happen is that old roof needs to come off. The walls with structural integrity issues need to be repaired. We need to get rid of traditional HVAC, because when you have an inside that's 60 degrees and an outside that's 110 degrees, that's a problem, where the airflow is happening. So we're doing more of a forced air. It's healthier for the stone. And then, but to do that, the roof has to come off. 18 months, because everything goes on time and on budget with a 300-year-old building. Yes, thank you for laughing, because that is funny. But we're trying. But we have to build a temporary protective structure over the Alamo. So sort of like a barn. We're going to leave the sides open. We're going to leave the western parapet open. We're going to leave as much access as we can inside. Of course, that's not going to be very much because it's an active construction site, but whatever we can give availability to, we will. But when that temporary protective structure goes up, sometime late spring, early summer, I think my name ID is going to rise. So I would ask all your viewers to please help me correct the incorrect narrative. It is a temporary protective enclosure. It is what is necessary to protect the Alamo, because can you imagine if that roof was off and we had a massive hailstorm or a massive rainstorm? It could cause irreparable damage. And so we don't want that to happen. So when all is done and everything's wonderful, we're going to pull that structure down. It is, of course, being recycled. We're being good conservationists, with our resources. And so it's going to move to San Antonio Zoo and be a wonderful shade structure for them and some of their exhibits. And ironically, the San Antonio Zoo is the original quarry of the Alamo. And we discovered it fairly recently. We were running around because if we were going to need new stone, we would love to have an exact match. And of course, there's lots of quarries in the area. Of course, they're not going to pull the stone hundreds of miles. So we knew we had kind of a set radius. And so we hadn't quite found the exact match. But then the San Antonio Zoo was expanding their gorilla exhibit, and they were quarrying out the stone. And we said, ooh, we haven't tested that one. We know it's an old quarry of about that time era. And sure enough, that's the exact match. So as they were expanding their gorilla exhibit, we were getting stone that we may need for reconstructing various walls. And so it was a win-win. And now our shade structure, we're going to be able to share it back with them. And it's just a great opportunity. But at the end of the day, you're going to be able to spend days at the Alamo and not see absolutely everything. And so it is really an honor to be a part of such a significant event.
That is so important. And I'm glad you have a chance to get the whole story out there, because you're right. People are going to, at first glance, they're going to see a temporary structure and be a little bit freaked out. But you're absolutely right. It is so important. It's such a momentous and inspiring location. Mm-hmm. Be inspiring when somebody sees it in person, and also that it not crumble.
And we're really going for that somber experience. We want people, we come from a loud and proud history. I was at an international conference, and they said, what is so special about Texas? And I said, what is so special about Texas is that we were founded by people who were running to liberty. They weren't running from anything. It was very different. And the people who came here were fiercely independent, tough as nails, and they did amazing things. And so Texas leads the world, and we do that because of our independent spirit. And that is why the Alamo is so important, to teach that history so that we can be bold moving forward.
It matters so much. Well, and taking that kind of care with our most important artifact, the Alamo, that's a through line in the way you've also worked to take care of the other assets the GLO manages. So let's talk about some of that. Let's start with the land.
13 million acres, largest landowner in Texas, largest mineral owner in Texas on behalf of the school children. Our lands have funded public education to the tune of $6 billion in the last just over 2.5 years of my service. Of course, that feeds the Permanent School Fund, almost $60 billion. The oldest, largest sovereign wealth fund in the nation. And, Texas was unique again because we entered the Union as a sovereign nation. The Trust Land Association loves it when I walk in and go, okay, former territories, we, the sovereign nation of Texas, believe, kind of funny thing. But we were able to retain our unowned lands. And I think that's really been part of the transformational difference in what makes Texas so special, because that revenue isn't just going into the eternally draining bucket of the federal government, that revenue is coming to Texas, and we are much better stewards of that revenue. And so we get to stand up and defend oil and gas unapologetically. We sued the Biden administration over and over and over again. We threw down the legal challenge and filing that blocked Biden's prohibition of liquefied natural gas exports. We suing them right and left over the endangered species. We are bringing transformational solutions, whether it's produced water, getting it to agricultural levels for the same price as injection, and literally potentially turning West Texas into a garden oasis, which we are going to do, by the way. Just watch, because when we get the produced water right, we're talking about millions of barrels a day. And it's just so exciting. And so we just get to do all of that. But then we have the whole coast. We do beach renourishment and habitat restoration and artificial reefing and you name it. We do all of that amazing stuff. We do resiliency. We're embarking on the largest infrastructure project that the Army Corps of Engineers has ever done, called the Coastal Spine. It's a resiliency barrier starting in Louisiana, hopefully going all the way to Mexico, but basically building a system of dunes, levees, barriers that protect our coast when those massive hurricanes come in. We are in the process of delivering $14 billion in disaster recovery and recovering from the largest disaster that this country has ever seen in Hurricane Harvey. And we're putting a good bow on that and getting that right-sided. We also take care of veterans. Most people don't know we run 10 veterans nursing homes across the state, 5 veterans cemeteries, and we run a veterans mortgage lending program. So we have lent veterans $1.5 billion in the last 2 years, helping our veterans getting into their homes and renovating their homes to make their needs. I mean, every day I get to serve veterans and fund education and help Texans recovering from disaster, and then steward our coast and our state lands, and just super fun stuff. I could go on and on and on about all the fun things we get to do.
It is absolutely amazing. And you're right. When people ask me why the situation in Texas is so different and why the state government is in such a better position, I will frequently show them a map of the federally owned lands in the United States. And boy, when you get west of Texas, I mean, Nevada is 90% owned by the federal government. I mean, that's dysfunctional on so many levels. And thank God that our founding fathers, who had been through a couple of revolutions, knew enough to keep ownership for Texas of all those lands when we joined the Union.
Well, in that ownership, we own the largest, most complete set of rare earth minerals in the world, not under China's control. Rare earth minerals, when you get into like, what are we doing? I mean, rare earth minerals, they're peaking everywhere. China's controlling the market. They're saying, oh, we're going to withhold them. Maybe we're not. That's the only place you can refine these minerals. Your phone has over 20 rare earth minerals in it. Don't even start me on jets need them to fly. So here we are. We're bringing a solution. We're going to break China's monopoly. And that was property, ironically, that the General Land Office was trying to sell not too long ago, a decade or two ago, and they couldn't give it away. So it's the perfect example of why you have to retain your land, why you should retain your surface. When you look at surface plays in Texas, there's a defunct railroad from the 1800s that's actually one of the hottest stocks trading in New York, because they took this railroad and then now they're doing surface plays, whether it's they're selling the groundwater, whether it's they're doing surface leases for data centers, you name it. And so we're looking at that. We're looking at how do we continue to produce revenue for the school children of Texas? Oil and gas is going to be here at least another 100 years, right? We're not worried about that. Cornerstone of not just our energy independence, but our entire economy. However, we are on the precipice of an energy revolution, and we have thousands of people a day moving to Texas, more and more energy demand needs with these data centers coming, with everything happening. And so how do we create more energy, because we need it? And so we're being a part of that, looking at salt-cooled nuclear, small nuclear, hydrogen technologies, getting into the graphene play, which if you don't know what graphene is, oh, that's right, you asked me. No, I'm teasing, but it's basically a carbon molecule, a single layer thick. And it's important because it helps cement be really strong. If you've noticed, cement has lost some of its structural integrity with less coal ash being created right now. So graphene is really important but also it's great in energy storage, may even surpass lithium batteries, and it's great in transmission. And yet China has the corner on that market. But when you look at gas, let's just take methane. And all that is some carbon molecules and some hydrogen molecules scooped together in gas. We can cleave off those hydrogen molecules. You can burn them to drive the desalinization. You can cleave those off by passing it through a plasma array, and then you precipitate the carbon out as graphene. You have something that's at least $1,000 an ounce. You're burning the hydrogen for the desalinization. Like we are just really going and doing amazing things and trying to be a part of everything that's important for Texas.
Well, and taking processes like that where otherwise what you would have is waste and otherwise what you would have is expense and instead what you now have is revenue, that is so critical. It becomes a flywheel that makes everything work better.
Right. And you can't just look back and rely on legacy technologies. You have to look forward. We're really trying to embrace artificial intelligence. We're really talking about how can we contribute to building an intelligent infrastructure. Lines on poles, they're not working so well. So we need to be kind of looking ahead and creating this intelligent infrastructure, from the self-driving cars that need it to, let's just talk about the terrible floods that happened on July 4th. We're in the process of delivering about $1 billion in flood mitigation. But part of that, we had actually started in April, the first integrative and predictive flood study in the entire country. And so that didn't help us on July 4th, and I don't think anyone could have anticipated what fell in a small canyon in a matter of hours, in that wall of water that hit through Hunt and Ingram, and many other counties as well. But we need to get smart about it, and that's going to be embracing new technologies and new warning systems and increasing the true broadband access, true 5G access. Which was part of that problem. And so we just want to be a part of it any way we can.
Well, I love that your office was involved in that. As you know, we just had a constitutional amendment about future water investments. And both of us have the benefit of living near Lake Travis and sometimes enjoying the water that is sometimes there. But every day I tell people to be thankful that decades ago, a whole bunch of engineers and forward-thinking people set that flood control and water supply system in place. We need to be doing a lot more of the same now. And
we do.
So glad you're working on that. You said your office works on the environmental disaster recovery funds and handling those. You're still wrapping up the fund work from Harvey. You just talked about the floods. What's been the biggest challenge on handling the distribution of those funds, making sure that the people are taken care of and that the funds are properly stewarded?
It's complicated because kind of the way this happens from our end. So there's the acute part of the phase, right? And that's when Texas Department of Emergency Management steps in. That's getting people out of their flooded houses. That's the immediate muck and gut, all that. And that's different. When we come in, it's about 2 years after the disaster. So I'm going to kind of walk you through that. So a disaster has to hit a certain threshold. Federal disaster has to be called. All these things has to happen. Congress has to allocate money. They allocate that money with some guidelines. Those guidelines go to HUD. HUD propagates rules. So everyone is super impressed when they've been out of their house for 2 years and we show up and say, hey, we're in our red cape. We're here to save you. And they're like, where have you been? So that's a little frustrating that we can't get that process a little more streamlined. And then some of the rules are a little frustrating. And then it's also frustrating that we get to be the umpire on the field. We don't get to make the rules, but we get to enforce them. And the federal government does wonky things sometimes, bless their hearts. So, but that's all right. In the end of the day, we're getting it done. We believe in local control. So the way we did it is we came in that those funds were allocated and we went to the local council area of governments and we said, okay, this is a competitive process because you all know what projects are shovel ready. You all know what's most important to your region. You're going to prioritize those. You're going to tell us, and that's what we're going to fund. And so that's kind of how it all worked. The houses, but it's wonderful to put thousands of families back in their houses. And it's just, we do key handoffs. It's amazing. So we just get to do a lot of fun things with that, but it's a hard path. And honestly, when I took over the Harvey recovery, there was a lot of talk and it wasn't really positive about the GLO. And so I was really surprised when I got in and realized the GLO was actually doing it right. No one's perfect, but doing it right. Harris County and Houston were completely messing it up. And yet the GLO hadn't corrected an incorrect narrative, and they'd allowed the leaders in Harris County and Houston to set a narrative that was just absolutely false. So we walked straight into that hornet's nest. And what I do is I just charge straight into adversity, because we're going to fight the good fight. We're going to speak our truth. And we stood unapologetically in those communities and spoke our truth. And then we're able to keep resources there, because due to the incompetence of some of the Harris County and Houston stuff, that money has to be reallocated, because if it's not spent by a certain time, it goes away forever and serves no one. So there's a point at which we have to say, woo, you're not going to get this done. If we're going to keep these resources in this community, we have to take action. And so we were able to keep $1 billion in flood mitigation in Harris County to still serve those residents. And we were able to do that by standing very bravely, but also reaching across the aisle, and getting it done. Because when people are elected, our folks elect us to get the job done, not sit around and pontificate, but actually do it. And so that's why we do a lot of things. That's why we do make Texas bigger. When DPS called and said, hey, we have these islands in the Rio Grande and they're safe havens for the cartels. And hey, Dawn, can you declare them Texas? And the ask had been in for a long time. I'm just going to be honest. And it took me 48 hours. I was like, we're the mapping entity for the state. Where's the center of the river? Our treaty with Mexico from 1836 says anything north of the center of the river is Texas. Like, I don't know why this is so hard, but we're declaring them Texas. And we did. And when we did that, we were able to, then the DPS and Border Patrol and the military department were able to come in, get those islands cleared of brush, get the wire up. And I'm going to tell you, the biggest island's 171 acres. They're not small pieces of property. And we found structures and IEDs and guns and drugs and abused women and children. We've bulldozed rape trees on properties that we bought from a landowner. Right after the island thing happened, the Facilities Commission is the state entity building the wall, and they gave me a call and said, hey, Dawn, we have this problematic landowner. She has a couple thousand acres. It's on the river down in the valley. She won't let law enforcement step on it. It's where we believe the original rape trees were found. It was the highest crime of anywhere in that region, and she was just letting them come, because once the bad guys know they have a safe place to go, that's where they go. And so they said, look, we can get into a big eminent domain fight with her. It'll cost such a bunch of money. It'll take a long time. As someone who stands up for property owner rights, nobody likes eminent domain. So we made her a fair market value offer for her ranch, and she sold it to us. And so now that ranch is growing food that generates revenue for the school children of Texas. It's got the wall on it, which we had that right of way negotiated within 24 hours. And I personally got in a bulldozer, did one tree in high heel stiletto American flag shoes, ladies, just for y'all, because we do everything men do backwards and in heels. And we bulldoze those trees as a sign that this isn't happening on this property anymore.
That is so fantastic. And I love that the details of that. You didn't have to change the law. You didn't have to change. The treaty said what the treaty said, and the mapping said what the mapping said. All you had to do was take advantage of what was there in order to meet a very real need.
I really like the executive branch, because the legislature sets our rails. They say, here's your rails. This is what you're supposed to do. These are your authorities. And so we've got our rails, we've got our marching orders, we've got our goals to serve Texas, and we just charge forth. I will admit my 800 employees might have gotten a little whiplash when I took office, because I'm like, this is how we move, ladies and gentlemen. And so we kind of charge forth, but it's just a lot of fun, because you have your defined limitations, and then within that, you just say, how can we be helpful? How can we be a part of building the Texas that we know and love?
Well, and that is a theme that I'm sensing, that leaders in Texas who get things done, like yourself, have that attitude, and that it permeates throughout the agency. And that's a really positive thing. And I could not be happier for it. It's been a pleasure to know you all these years. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you.